What are the radiologic features of benign ovarian tumors? They are unilocular, unilateral. They have a smooth surface with no solid elements, unless, like, in the previous class we talked about how there are certain solid ovarian benign tumors. Okay. Other than that, if it is cystic with solid elements, generally we have to be suspicious that it's a malignancy. There are no internal or external outgrowths, so papillations that we talk about, right? And there is no ascites and Doppler flow. Okay, always a normal Doppler flow. What happens in the case of malignant tumors? There is neovascularization, right? So because of neovascularization, there is increased flow. So there is increased Doppler flow to the ovarian, to the cyst, around the cyst. You can see there is increased Doppler flow. That is due to neovascularization generally. Okay, so these are certain, some of the malignant features that you can see here actually. There are septations you can see more than 3 millimeters. If you find mural nodules, papillary projections. Okay, this one is about papillary projections, and then there are frank solid components. All this are features of malignancy. So where you don't have these, when you have thin septations, no nodularity, no projections, no solid components, that is suggestive of a benign tumor. These are certain other, some other radiological pictures. So this talks about the wall thickness, the wall. Thus the wall of the ovarian cyst will be thin walled. Okay, thick walled cyst is likely to be malignant. Unilocular cysts are benign. Multilocular cysts are likely to be malignant. Then there is papillations. Where there is papillations are present, it is likely to be malignant. Absent is benign feature. Okay, low echogenicity and simple appearance instead of a complex appearance. If it is a simple appearance, then it is likely to be benign. These are all features of benign tumors. Now clinically, okay, clinically, so how do we, should we talk about the clinical features and then go to the ultrasound features, right? Anyway, so how do we clinically, how do we distinguish between benign ovarian tumors and malignant? So just keep in mind what is the ultrasound picture. So clinically, whatever you can assess from the what ultrasound picture is there. So generally it will be unilateral, cystic in consistency, mobile, the mass will be usually mobile, and no ascites, and if you are seeing it over a period of time like over 1 month or 2 months, there is no growth or slow growth. These are all features of benign ovarian tumors. Then of course it's surface field, surface, there is no nodularity on the surface, it's smooth surfaced, there is no firm, it's not firm in consistency. This is all features of benign ovarian tumors. Now, how do we go about evaluating an ovarian adnexal mass? Okay, generally history. So history, you ask about the onset of symptoms, how, what kind of this thing you can assess them. If there are any ovulation related or menstrual disorders, then you can think about maybe it's a benign functional ovarian cyst, or maybe it is a maybe it's a estrogen secreting tumor or something like that. Then physical examination. So physical examination would include what? Abdominal examination as well as a bimanual pelvic examination to know whether it is a mobile mass, what is the size of the mass, what's the consistency of the mass. Then if you're doing a vaginal examination or rather your bimanual pelvic examination, you can find out there are nodularity in the pouch of Douglas. All those things can be assessed. In general examination, what is the one specific feature that you look for other than weight loss, other than the weight and BMI? The other feature that you look for is left supraclavicular lymph nodes, okay, which can be enlarged in ovarian malignancy, rarely. Okay, then after your history and physical examination, what is your next step? Ultrasound, CT scan, or you have other modalities like CT scan, contrast, MRI, and laparoscopy or laparotomy. And of course, there are tumor markers. Okay, tumor markers will be, I think, must have been taught to you already in your malignant ovarian tumors class. Okay, so that is what helps you to distinguish between benign and ovarian masses and plan on further management. So indications for surgery would be an ovarian cyst which is not resolving. It is going on, you have been watching it for some time, 3, 4, 6 months. It is not increasing in size, but it's not resolving either. It is at a stationary of about maybe more than 5 centimeters. Then if there are solid lesions, you won't take a chance. Papillary vegetations, yes, that is very likely, that is a feature of malignancy. If the mass is more than 10 centimeters at the time of presentation, there is ascites, again a feature of malignancy. If it's any palpable ovarian mass, adnexal mass in a premenarchal or postmenarchal group, because in that time you are expecting the ovary not to be an active ovary, right? So you don't expect the ovary to be palpable. So if you find a palpable mass, you have to be extra vigilant. And your tumor markers won't tell you. It is not 100% tumor marker will tell you if it's a malignancy or not. So always your index of suspicion should be high. Okay, and also there is whenever there is a suspicion of torsion or rupture of the particular tumor. So that is, even benign tumors can undergo, are more likely to undergo torsion, and even rupture can occur in both benign and malignant ovarian tumors. So management of benign tumors, benign tumors are generally treated by unilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. This is if it is too huge. If the cyst is very big, then you might have to go in for a salpingo-oophorectomy. But if it is, you can preserve the ovary. Depending if it's small neoplasm, then probably you can get away with a cystectomy, and that way you can preserve whatever ovarian function you are possible on that side. You can preserve a little bit of the ovary. You can save it. Okay. Then gonadoblastoma, dysgenetic ovaries usually occurs in dysgenetic ovaries. So that is they would require bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. And appendicectomy should be also considered in mucinous cystidioma because it is associated with the mucocele of the appendix generally. So if it is a mucinous cystidioma, usually we recommend an appendectomy also. Now we come to polycystic ovary syndrome, okay, PCOS or PCOD. So about 6 to 20% of the reproductive age group women are affected. So you can imagine what is the burden of disease in the community, right? It's a very common condition. It's just something that you will find in every OPD. Somebody will be coming, and they generally belong. Obviously, they'll come in the reproductive age group. Many of them might be in the late teens or early 20s. So it is two of the following features has to be there. So it is reduced ovulation, hyperandrogenism, or polycystic appearance of the ovary. If any two of the following features are present, then we would say that this person is called a PCOS. So reduced ovulation means what? Menstrual symptoms, right? Because reduced ovulation means there is oligomenorrhea. There is no ovulation, no progesterone. So the menstruation does not happen at regular intervals. Then hyperandrogenic features like hirsutism, acne, all those things, and polycystic appearance of the ovary. Now these are clinical features. How they present is with hirsutism, acne, infertility, obesity, and type 2 diabetes mellitus. So it's always PCOS is considered a pre-diabetic condition. So women with PCOS are likely to go in for diabetes because it's part of metabolic syndrome. Okay. Now lab values, if you look at, you will find that it's hyperandrogenism, so the testosterone values will be high. The LH-FSH ratio will be higher than 2 because the LH is high, LH level is high and the FSH is low. Estrone is high because of peripheral conversion of androgens, and the high LH will affect the theca cell to produce high androgens which undergoes peripheral conversion to estrone, and this causes the feedback inhibition of FSH. This is how you get the high LH and low FSH levels. And ultrasound wise, you will have bilateral non-ovulated enlarged cysts, but generally you won't be sending all these hormones because this hormone panel turns out to be quite expensive, right? So it is generally a clinical diagnosis based on the ultrasound, and you might be sending thyroid TSH levels. You don't really send for if you've got an ovulation and ultrasound features, you don't really send for all this hormone levels. So the causes, there is a hyperinsulinemia. It is a pre-diabetic condition. There is an underlying hyperinsulinemia which reduces the sex hormone binding globulin, and this causes more available androgen in the circulation, which increases the LH, and also the increase in the LH can cause increase in the androgen production. So by and large, you get a hyperandrogenism there. And obesity also can decrease SHBG levels. So when you go about it, you have to exclude certain differential diagnoses like congenital adrenal hyperplasia and hyperthyroidism, hyperprolactinemia, and Cushing's syndrome. And these women are at increased risk of endometrial carcinoma because there is unopposed estrogen on the endometrium. So that is, it is good to make them bleed on a cyclical basis. Many of them may be happy because they are having only every 2-3 months or 4 months only I get my periods. They are not unhappy about it. They are not going for a childbearing function. They are not looking for treatment for infertility as such. But it's not good to have your endometrium exposed to estrogen. Unopposed estrogen exposure should be avoided. So it is good to treat them with some kind of progesterones. Ultrasound wise, there are more than or equal to 20 follicles per ovary, and or the ovarian volume, which is more than 10 ml. But when you are measuring the ultrasound, you have to make sure that when you saying it is more than 10 ml, you are not including the corpus luteum. There should not be any corpus luteum sister dominant follicle when you are measuring the ovarian volume. And historically, this is how we describe the PCOD look of the ultrasound PCOD look is hyperechoic central stroma with a string of pearls appearance as a peripheral location of the follicles. And the follicles are generally 2 to 9 millimeters in size. So that is historically how we used to describe the PCO, polycystic ovarian syndrome, the ovarian appearance. String of pearls. Now, treatment is specific, like, to what she has come to you for treatment. If it's for hirsutism, then you have to advise about lifestyle changes, that is about diet and lifestyle changes. Then flutamide, which is an androgen receptor inhibitor, can be used. Finasteride is 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. These are all to reduce the to treat the hyperandrogenism as such. Spironolactone inhibits the steroid binding and synthesis of testosterone. And OCPs also reduce the luteinizing hormone, so that can lower androgens. And metformin can increase the insulin sensitivity. These are all the drugs which are available for treatment of hirsutism in PCOD. Now, if she's coming to you with infertility, you have to treat the infertility. So, you have to induce ovulation, right? The reason for infertility is because she's got ovulatory problems. So, you need to tackle that. So, you need to give something which is ovulation induction agent. Generally, what we use is clomiphene citrate, which is the SERM. It stimulates the release of FSH and LH, and otherwise it is letrozole. Okay, these are the two drugs available as ovulation induction agents, oral drugs. Okay, you can give it as orally. So, clomiphene citrate or letrozole, which is an aromatase inhibitor. And now she's coming to you for menstrual irregularity. Then ovulation is the problem. That is why the menstrual irregularity is occurring. So, do you want to induce ovulation for somebody who is coming with menstrual irregularity? You really don't want to induce ovulation. What you want to give her is, you want her endometrium to have the benefits of both estrogen and progesterone. So, which can be done by giving cyclical combined OCPs or cyclical medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is the most common progesterone that we use in our OPD. For most of the menstrual problems, we use MPA or medroxyprogesterone acetate. This is because you don't want to really, you are not really looking for ovulation as such. So, you don't have to really trigger ovulation, because it may not work also. Ovulation, every cycle you cannot keep on giving clomiphene citrate. But whereas COCs and MPA, if you give, it might reset the HPO axis, and she might end up having normal cycles after, if you treat her for 3 to 6 months, she might end up having normal cycles. That is along with lifestyle changes. And COCs, if you treat for about 3 to 6 months, they might go back to a normal HPO axis and normal cycle, or you might have to treat them for a long period. Make sure that she doesn't go into amenorrhea or oligomenorrhea. Okay, so that is it. And okay, I will be sending the assignment, and you can log into the Google Classroom. I will send the assignment there, and you can submit your assignments into the Google classes like we used to do before. Okay, I'll be uploading the next 2 classes in the next few days. So these assignments, please submit it within 24 hours, because I'm going to take off these videos and then I'm going to upload the next video, because I don't want too many clutter, so it will be taken off, and then you can submit your answers within 24 hours. I'll give you. So by tomorrow afternoon I'll be uploading the next class. Okay, thank you.